On this Sunday night, China's peace plan for Ukraine. A ploy? The skepticism and stern warning to Beijing.
If anybody has potentially some influence on Russia, it might be China.
What happens if the West's two biggest rivals team up? Canada's anti-Islamophobia representative gets set to start her new job.
Let her do her work.
Calgary's former mayor on the politics behind Amira Al-Gawabi's rough road to day one. AI and breast cancer. The Canadian lab using new tech to personalize treatment.
I just looked at the pictures, but I couldn't believe that.
Raising thousands for earthquake relief. How this Canadian 10-year-old's name and birthday inspired him to help.
Global National with Farah Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. In a few days, the world will mark 1 year since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. As Western nations, like Canada, continue to send military supports to Kyiv, Washington is concerned China could throw its might behind Russia. The U.S. has warned of serious consequences should that happen. But as Redmond Shannon reports, China says it wants to broker a peace plan rather than escalate the war.
The last week of the first year of the full-scale war in Ukraine. The country's soldiers awaiting more Western tanks and equipment on the battlefield.
There is still a lot to be done. We have to increase and accelerate our military support to Ukraine.
As the EU's top diplomat rallies more support for Kyiv, his US counterpart warns China against supplying any arms to Russia.
We have seen them provide non-lethal support to Russia for use in Ukraine. The concern that we have now is based on information we have that they're considering providing lethal support. And we've made very clear to them that that would cause a serious problem for us and in our relationship.
Amid the ever-inflating tensions over alleged spy balloons, Antony Blinken met with China's foreign affairs chief at the Munich Security Conference this weekend, telling Wang Yi that there would be serious consequences should Beijing send weapons to Vladimir Putin.
The Russian economy is 10 times smaller than that of China. It's 13 times smaller than that of the US. So, China has the potential to be a real game changer if it was to support Russia.
But post-Soviet expert Danica Obakoin says potential US sanctions could seriously hurt China's export-driven economy, if it comes to that. Yi told Munich delegates China is opposed to profiting from the war. He says Beijing will instead propose a peace plan as the first anniversary of Russia's invasion approaches.
If anybody has potentially some influence on Russia, it might be China. But I don't think we should overestimate the influence that China has on Russia either.
Yi says China would push for territorial integrity to be respected. But Moscow now regards 5 of Ukraine's 25 regions as part of Russia. Before the war, Vladimir Putin and China's Xi Jinping spoke of a no-limits partnership. But old commitments would be tested if China tries to broker a lasting peace. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Another challenging obstacle stemming from the war is the exports of grain from Ukraine. Ukraine's known as the breadbasket of the world, and the amount of grain leaving the country has dropped even after a UN-brokered deal to keep the supplies flowing. Inspection of ships have fallen to half of what they were 4 months ago, and the backlog of vessels has grown. Separate agreements to keep supplies moving from the warring nations are up for renewal next month. But less grain out of Ukraine raises concern about something else, the impact to nations struggling with food insecurity in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. And Global News will air a special on February 25th to mark the 1-year anniversary since the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine. For nearly 2 weeks, the world has watched as twin earthquakes shattered the lives of millions in Turkey and Syria. More than 46,000 people were killed. Many are still missing, millions displaced, and parts of the hardest hit areas have been deemed uninhabitable. As rescue efforts come to a close, there was a moment of thanks for lives rescuers did manage to save. Crews from over 80 countries took part in rescues. even into the 13th day after the quake. But as Mackenzie Gray reports, despite the rare stories of hope, there is anger and despair, especially over the length of time it took to get professional rescue crews into Syria.
1,000 people used to live in this block in northern Syria. 800 of them are now dead. Mustafa al-Muawri spent 22 hours under this rubble with his wife and 3 children. He got rescuers' attention by banging on the debris. But while Mustafa's immediate family were rescued, 20 of his relatives weren't. I have no hope left, he says. I sometimes think it would have been better if I stayed under the rubble. That grief and sense of desperation is everywhere in northern Syria, where thousands are struggling and without the necessities after the devastating earthquakes and the decade of war they've endured before. Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad has limited foreign aid to the rebel-held north. Only Sunday were Doctors Without Borders finally able to enter the country, 13 days after the disaster. The United Nations, too, has been limited in what they can provide.
We're doing our best to step up the response as quickly as we can.
But those efforts simply can't meet the demand, as aid workers have struggled to keep up with making and providing tents to the displaced. Many of those who are now homeless across Syria and Turkey are still holding out hope family members can be rescued from under what's left of their homes and buildings. But Sunday also brought a grim reality. By nightfall, the active search for survivors is set to end across most of Turkey. Those not yet accounted for, presumed dead.
As time goes on, there's no question that the likelihood of finding survivors becomes vanishingly small. So it's a reasonable response, I think.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken toured the damage over Turkey, promising $100 million in additional aid for the region.
When you see the extent of the damage, the number of buildings, the number of apartments, the number of homes that have been destroyed, it's going to take a massive effort to rebuild.
Canada has pledged $20 million so far. The funding will help. But for the survivors who've lost so much, the cost of these earthquakes are incalculable. Mackenzie Gray, Global News, Ottawa.
Thousands are missing in New Zealand after a cyclone tore through parts of the island nation last week. Search and rescue efforts for survivors are underway, but disruptions to communication and a lack of access to damaged areas is causing delays. More than 28,000 homes are still without power. The Prime Minister has said it's the worst natural disaster there this century and is keeping the country under a state of emergency. Making the situation worse, Cyclone Gabrielle hit New Zealand's North Island just 2 weeks after it was flooded with record rainfall. At 98, former U.S. President Jimmy Carter is America's longest-living leader in American history. But yesterday it was announced that the former president entered hospice care at his home in Georgia after a series of short hospital stays. The former president has suffered recent health issues, including a fight with melanoma. In a statement, the Carter Center says Jimmy Carter has decided to spend his remaining time at home with his family instead of undergoing additional medical intervention, and that he's grateful for all the concern shown by his admirers. Canada's first special representative on combating Islamophobia officially takes office tomorrow, but it has been a very bumpy road to the new role for Amira Al-Gawabi, who's been under attack in Quebec for weeks, ironically for pointing out Islamophobia in the province. At the beginning of the month, Al-Gawabi apologized before her job began.
And I would like to say that I am extremely sorry for the way that my words have carried, how they have hurt the people of Quebec.
The words of concern relate to this op-ed piece she co-wrote in 2019, referencing a poll that showed 88% of Quebecers who had negative views of Islam also supported Bill 21, Quebec's secularism law that prevents public workers from wearing religious symbols. Al-Gawabi met with Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet. And while the Prime Minister says he supports her, Blanchet has demanded for her resignation and that the position be abolished.
This is a bad choice by the Prime Minister, who, making such a choice, destroyed the possible credibility of the function.
This past week, former Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi spoke to the Senate Committee on Human Rights, urging politicians to stand up for Al-Gawabi. He joins us now from Calgary. Thank you for making the time, Naheed Nenshi. Let's start with why it was important for you to speak up.
Well, thanks for having me, Farah. You know, when I saw the treatment of Amira Al-Gawabi, when I saw kind of the discourse around the province of Quebec and Islamophobia and all of these things, when I saw, frankly, how she was being browbeaten and lectured to and forced to take meetings with people who had no intention of listening to her, were just using her to score political points, I thought, well, the timing is apt to really highlight how we have a federal government that on the one hand recognizes that we've got a big problem in terms of the increase in overall hate and division in our community. And so on the one hand, you have a government that recognizes this, that appoints someone to fight Islamophobia, but then on the other hand, sort of seems to expect that whoever they appointed to fight Islamophobia has nothing to say about actual Islamophobia. Struck me as a bit odd.
What did you want to hear from the Prime Minister and other politicians when it came to Al-Gawabi, and what happened?
I've been very vocal for many, many years around what was Bill 21 in Quebec, which is the law that restricts people from jobs they can do if they happen to be a Muslim woman who wears a hijab, or a Sikh who wears a turban, or a Jewish person who wears a skull cap, a kippah, or yarmulke. I don't claim to be an expert at all on Quebec, not at all. But I do know that there's a general rule, which is that past discrimination doesn't justify current discrimination. And I was surprised to see how many politicians in Ottawa, well, you could see behind their heads doing the math. How many Muslim voters am I going to irritate versus how many other voters am I going to get if I say these things? And you know what? Politically, that doesn't work at all.
What do you think the government should do now with this position?
Let her do her work. Make sure that she's got a really clear mandate in terms of what she needs to do, because the country demands no less of it. When we have, young girls physically attacked for wearing a hijab at train stations in Edmonton, when the question of how do I express my faith, how do I dress, becomes a political question instead of a question of faith between myself and my worshiping, that's a real problem. And I really believe that the issue of secularism has been really misdefined. Secularism to me doesn't mean kicking out certain people of faith from the public square. It means welcoming everyone and ensuring that our community is strong enough that what someone wears doesn't threaten our culture, it only enriches it.
It's not going away anytime soon. So what's the way to kind of bridge the gap with these two sides?
I've often suggested that I wanted to see other governments in Canada, municipal, provincial, federal, take a stronger stance against Bill 21. Let's remember that it's not about secularism and treating everyone equally if it treats some people differently than others. And that's the other important thing to remember. This is not about picking on people in Quebec. Studies have shown that that kind of law would be broadly very popular across Canada. But most politicians say, never mind that it's popular, it's not the right thing to do. And that's what we have to be able to rely upon. It actually, if you are a politician, that's not going to cause you votes. People are going to vote based on their taxes and healthcare and education and all the things that are important. So pandering, because you think something's going to be popular, is not actually going to change the votes that you get.
All right, Nahid Nanshi, thank you so much for your time and your insight, as always.
Thank you.
Wait times reduced and quicker access to care. Coming up, how a Canadian-developed AI model could help cancer patients get the chemo treatment they need. Artificial intelligence is making its mark on many industries, including medicine. And the latest example of this being an AI model that's been developed by Canadian scientists for treating breast cancer. As Catherine Ward explains, it's capable of predicting the best way to treat patients in ways technology previously couldn't.
It feels like something out of a dream in terms of the impact I've been able to make.
Amy Tai always knew she wanted to help cancer patients. Her AI model is exceeding expectations just a year into its development. The AI looks at a new type of MRI scan in breast cancer patients,
which is really tailored at capturing details and properties of cancer in a way that previous MRI systems cannot capture.
The model then works to determine if chemotherapy would be helpful prior to surgery. One example after another, the AI learns and builds its knowledge.
It's able to really understand and then be able to predict whether a particular patient, based on this MRI data, is likely to benefit from a certain type of chemotherapy.
The tool was able to identify and predict which patients would benefit from chemotherapy with over 87% accuracy when it reviewed a group of more than 250 patients in the United States. A big help for doctors who have traditionally read those scans.
AI is always there as a complementary tool or assistant to a doctor to help them make better decisions so they're able to treat more patients as well as give them a better quality level of care.
And patients navigating treatment options.
So patients, especially cancer patients, have very limited time and they want to make sure that they have the best possible treatment because there's that opportunity cost if you choose one type of treatment, that you lose the time and the resources to do another type of treatment.
Ty hopes this is only the beginning.
So next steps would be like expanding both in terms of breadth and depth, so going to other cancer domains potentially, and then focusing more on the breast cancer in terms of how we can leverage it for other types of treatments, other types of predictive cases.
Catherine Ward, Global News, Toronto.
Recharged and renewed ahead, the Canadian company using old car batteries to power its city's energy grid. So there's a reason that museums and art galleries have warning signs around fragile pieces of art and history, and it's because this can happen when you don't follow the rules. A $42,000 dog sculpture shattered to pieces at a VIP art event in Miami this weekend after an art collector accidentally tapped the piece. The iconic sculpture is from Jeff Koons' collection, but it's not all bad news. The piece is covered by insurance, and there are prospective buyers interested in the leftover shards because, quote, it has a cool story. Depending on where you live, electric cars may be a common sight to see on the roads. But what happens to those batteries when they've lost some of their juice? As Krista Hesse reports, a Vancouver area startup has developed a new device to give these old batteries a second act and help power a greener future.
This is the place where old electric car batteries are given a new life.
These EV batteries have 80% capacity left in them once they reach end of life, so this makes them perfect for stationary energy storage applications.
Gurmesh Sidhu is one of the co-founders of Moment Energy, a startup hoping to harness the scraps of the electric car revolution to power factories, neighborhoods, and even charging stations. This large blue box is the company's energy storage device. It's made up of retired EV batteries from Mercedes-Benz and Nissan vehicles. With more and more electric cars on the road, entrepreneurs are hoping to turn a potential waste problem into an opportunity for the power sector.
The adoption of electric vehicles causes major strain on the utility grid. So by adding a battery, we can provide excess power to these sites during the evenings when they're charging all of these electric vehicles.
It's an innovation that could save local utilities a lot of money. Moment Energy is currently testing that out through a project with Hydro Ottawa. Already it's been used to replace diesel fuel generators in remote areas and to store energy from solar and wind farms. This technology is completely new, and even though questions remain about its long-term reliability, Canadian innovations like this get us one step closer to a green energy future. Krista Hesse, Global News.
Canada's kids step up. Next, the connections that inspire these young Canadians to help victims of the earthquakes. The seemingly endless stories of heartache and loss from Turkey and Syria are overwhelming, but they've also inspired many people around the world to help, including right here in Canada. And as Heather Yurex-West explains, some of the greatest efforts have come from the hearts and minds of kids.
At 10 years old and a world away, he can't help search for survivors or fly to the earthquake zone with badly needed food and supplies. Still, Izmir Kassam is doing what he can to help the victims of this deadly disaster, raising money by running 100 kilometers over 10 days.
I turned 10. That's why I'm doing 10Ks.
Izmir turned 10 on February 6th, the same day the earthquake shook Turkey and Syria.
I just looked at the pictures and I couldn't believe that people were running away and the building just collapsed. Like, it was really heartbreaking.
The Calgary boy has never been to Turkey or Syria, but he feels a connection to the people there. His parents named him after one of Turkey's largest cities. For Aisha Ali of Langley, British Columbia, the connection is more personal. She has family in the earthquake zone.
When I talk to them and connect with them, I feel sad for them because they're like, they have lost their houses and their children and they're like outside in the coldness. Like, even though it didn't happen here, but like I felt it happened in front of my face.
Ali is one of several students at Langley Fundamental Middle and Secondary School who were Syrian refugees. It's why they've spent the last week fundraising for the people there, raising more than $3,500 so far in earthquake relief. With at least 1 million people suddenly homeless in Turkey and Syria, the need for urgent aid is great. And of course, Canada's young people aren't the only ones anxious to help.
We haven't set a goal, but if we were to set a goal, it would probably be somewhere in the range of $10,000 to $15,000 from the event.
Isri Kassam is hoping to raise $10,000 as well. In the face of such overwhelming devastation, Canadians of all ages taking steps to help in any way they can. Heather Yurex West, Global News, Calgary.
And I just checked online. Izmir is just about $1,000 shy of his $10,000 goal. And by the way, he also ran a half marathon to support girls in Afghanistan. We have some amazing young people in this country. That's Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Farah Nasser. Tonight's Your Canada is the ice sculptures at Ottawa's Winterlude Festival. We love seeing your Canada, so please keep emailing us those photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.